Alright, so now that we have learned how to simplify radicals, we will know what to do when we get to a radical and it is not simplified, which, if you see here, we're going to talk about the quadratic formula which contains a radical. So, if our radical cannot be simplified, if it's not a perfect square like this one, if it's not something like the square root of 9, which gives us a pretty number like 3, okay, we do have to simplify it using these same rules. Okay, now, again, like I said in the previous video, sometimes factoring will fail us. So if you have 3 terms and you cannot slide and divide, what you have to do is the quadratic formula, which guess what, you guys? The quadratic formula works every single time. So honestly, if you don't like slide and divide and you don't want to learn another factoring technique, technically, you can always use the quadratic formula. Now, its downsides. The quadratic formula does take longer than general factoring or slide and divide. Okay, so it takes longer, but it works every time. So I'll kind of leave it up to you and what you want to do. Okay, so the quadratic formula, first of all, before we can use it, our quadratic, or a polynomial, must be in standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This thing has to equal 0 first. Okay, after that, we are going to use this formula. So we're going to put the a, b, and c into the nifty formula and then simplify, which the formula is negative b, which I like to call the opposite of b, and I'll explain why. So opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, or divided by 2a. Okay, which in class I am going to teach you a nifty song to remember if you need help remembering it, because if you see here it's kind of a long formula, so I will teach you a song to help you memorize it. So I know you're dying to hear the song, but you'll have to wait on that in class. Okay. Alright, so let's look at this first example problem. Now, before I do anything, this equation must equal 0. Currently, it does not equal 0. So, we need to force one of the sides of our equations to be 0. Now, again, it does not matter which way you move things. Now, I personally like to keep my x squared term positive. That's just me. I personally think it makes things easier. Okay, but you don't have to. So, since I like my x squared term to be positive, I'm going to move over my 4x and my negative 3. So, let's get going. Alright, to move over a positive 4x, the way I do that is to subtract 4x on both sides. Okay, and since these are not like terms, I cannot combine them. So 4x minus 4x will cancel out and turn to 0. And so far I have x squared minus 4x equals negative 3. Alright guys, it still does not equal 0. So I need to move negative 3 over. And the opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. So I'm going to add it on both sides. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0, cancels out. And again, I don't have any like terms. So what I'm dealing with right now is this. X squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Alright guys, so now we can get this show on the road. So first, what we must do is identify the a, b, and c. After that, we just put in the formula and simplify. So let's see what happens. Alright, so my a term, now the a term is the number in front of the x squared, which I don't see a number in front of the x squared. So there secretly is a 1 in front of my x squared. So my a is 1, my b is the number in front of the x, which the number in front of my x is negative 4. And my c value is the number the number without the variable in it. So the number without the variable is a 3. So that's my c. Okay, you guys, let's get going. So the formula says we do x equals the opposite of b. Now the reason why I say this is the opposite of b, let's think about this. Okay, this is the negative of whatever b is. So let's say that b was a positive 2. I don't know. So if I do negative positive 2, that remains a negative 2. So if we start with a 2, a negative positive 2 is negative 2. So we have gone from a positive 2 to a negative 2. Okay, let's say I started with a negative 2. Okay, we're going to take the negative of that. So this would be like a negative 2. And if you have a double negative, guess what, you guys? It turns positive. So a negative 2 will turn into a positive 2. and a positive 2 will turn into a negative 2. So that's why I call this the opposite of B, because it's basically going to be whatever the opposite of B is going to be. Okay, so again, this had nothing to do with the problem. It was just kind of explaining what I was doing. So if that's confusing you, you can kind of cross it out. Okay, alright, so it'll be x equals the opposite of b, which the opposite of my b is a negative 4. So the opposite of that is a positive 4. Holy hot dog. Alright, then it'll be plus or minus the square root of b squared. So my b term is negative 4. So it'll be negative 4 squared minus 4 times a times c. Okay, in which my a term is a 1 and my c term is a 3. So it'll be minus 4 times 1 times 3. Alright, I'm going to extend this over. And then it is all over 2a. So we draw a line over everything. So divided by 2 times my a, which is a 1. Alright guys, after this we just need to simplify. So let's start simplifying. Let's go. Okay. Which, let's see. I'm not going to be able to fit it over there. Okay, I'm just going to slide this up. Alright guys, let's keep going. So, when I do this, you guys, I like to simplify whatever's in the square root first. Okay, so I'm going to do that first. So, on here, I'm going to do my radical. So, I have x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared. So, negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. Alright, now this second part, be very careful you guys. The negative is attached to the 4. So this is like negative 4 times 1 times 3. So negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, and negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. So it'll be minus 12, and then all over 2a. So 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, let's keep on going. Okay, so the next thing, let's keep simplifying this down. So we have x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 12, which is 4, all over 2. Alright guys, let's keep going. So we have the square root of 4. Okay, so the square root of 4, what times what gives me 4? Well, 2 times 2 gives me 4. So this will be x equals 4 plus or minus 2, all over 2. Alrighty, now I'm going to show you how to simplify this down, which you can only simplify something like this if the denominator will go into all parts of the numerator. Okay, so if the 2 only goes into one of them, we cannot simplify it this way. Alright guys, so let's simplify. So I'm going to look at this one first. 4 divided by 2 will give me a 2. So it'll be 2 plus or minus. Now I'm going to look the other way. 2 divided by 2 gives me a 1. So this is equivalent to that. Alright guys, so for my final answers, we have 2 answers. Okay, one time we're going to have x is equal to 2 plus 1. And one time we're going to have x equals 2 minus 1. So the plus or minus means one time we'll add and one time we'll subtract. So my answer will be x equals 2 plus 1 or x equals 2 minus 1. So we're going to have 2 answers for our final answer. So x equals 2 plus 1, which is 3. Or x equals 2 minus 1, which is 1. And that, you guys, would be my final answer. Holy hot dog, right? Holy hot dog. Alright, so this one had 2 solutions. We had x equals 3 and x equals 1. Okay, so we have 2 real roots. Okay? Alright, so now we're going to move on to part B, which, if this one made sense, you can try part B. Now, part B will be a little different, okay, but pretty much will be the same thing. Okay? Alright guys, so let's get going. Okay, so part B. First thing, we must make sure this bad boy equals 0. And I need to move a 2 over. So the way that I move 2 over is by subtracting it on both sides. Which 2 minus 2 cancels out and turns to 0. Now I can't combine 2 to anything because none of these are like terms. So far I'm looking at 5x squared minus 2x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so that's what I have so far. Alright guys, next step. I like to identify the a, the b, and the c next. So my a is the number in front of the x squared, which is the 5. My b is the number in front of the x, which is negative 2. And my c is the number without the variable, which is negative 2. Alright guys, let's get going. So we have x equals the opposite of b, which my b is a negative 2, so this will be a positive 2. So it'll be 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So we have negative 2 squared. Alright, and then it'll be minus 4 times a, which a is 5, times c, which our c is a negative 2. Alright guys, I'm going to extend out my square root symbol because I didn't quite make it. And then it's all over 2 times my a, which my a is 5. Alright guys, don't forget you divide the whole thing, not just part of it, the whole thing. Okay guys, let's start simplifying this thing. Okay, so again, I like to tackle the square root first, so let's start there. So we have x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. So I have 4. And then remember, you guys, the negative is attached to the 4. So negative 4 times 5 is negative 20. And negative 20 times negative 2 is positive 40. Holy hot dog, right? And then all over 2 times 5, which is 10. Alright guys, let's simplify this down. So x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 times 40, which is 44, all over 10. All over 10. Alright, now, square root of 44, that is not a perfect square. Okay, so there are not two of the same exact numbers. When you multiply them together, we'll give you a 44. So guess what, you guys? We need to do a factor tree. Guys, so I'm going to do that off to the side right here. Square root of 44. Alright, and if we find any pairs, they hop outside the square root. And if we have any lonely single numbers, they stay inside for the night. So they'll stay in the square root. Alright, so two things that go into 44 are things like 2 and 22. And then two things that go into 22 are 2 and 11. Guys, and I can't break this down any further because nothing else goes into any of these except one in itself. Alright, and if anything broke down, we ignore it. So the 44 broke down, so I ignore it. The 22 broke down, so I ignore it. Alright, so I'm looking at these numbers at the ends of the branches. So, do we see any cute couples that get to leave the square root for their hot math date? Holy hot dog, you guys, I spot them right here. The 2's. Okay, so when I write this, you guys, I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's going to equal, I have my 2 still, so 2 plus or minus. These things are going to hop out of my square root. So they're going to hop out here right after my plus or minus sign. So my 2's will hop outside the radical, and my lonely single 11 unfortunately has to stay inside the radical. And then it's all over 10. Alright guys, so our final answer, we need to simplify this thing, which, remember, we can only simplify if something goes into all three of these numbers. Okay, so nothing has to go into the square root though. If something is not in a square root, we cannot divide it into a square root. Only things with square roots can be divided into other things with square roots. So when we simplify, something has to go into all three of these numbers that are not in the square root. If something goes into all three, then we can simplify. Now, so I'm going to write my final answer here. Okay, just kind of ignore that. Okay, so for my final answer, what goes into 2, 2, and 10? Holy hot dog, you guys are so smart. A 2 goes into all three. Okay, so this will be x equals 2 divided by 2 is a 1. 1 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is a 1. Square root, I'm not going to divide into the square root. That's when the demon cats get you guys. Do not divide into your square root. Bad things happen to people that do that. And then all over 2 into 10 will be 5. So guys, 2 divided into all three of these, so I could simplify. Just like over here when we were working on the other question, I could have also stated it that way. I need something to go into all three of these numbers. Well, 2 went into all three of those numbers, and we reduced it down to that. Alright, so this one will reduce down to this, okay, which you can write it like that, or you can write it like this. You can leave it like that, or you can say x equals 1 plus root 11, which you guys can write 1 root 11 or just root 11 because 1 times anything is itself. So these two mean the same thing, all over 5. Or x could equal 1, now the minus, so minus root 11 over 5. So either of these are acceptable. You can leave it with the plus or minus, or you can split them up. Either way. Ours wasn't that problem awesome. So both of these gave us 2 real solutions. This one has 2, even though these kind of look weird, but this one has 2. And then this one also had 2. Awesome job, you guys.